You're listening to the Power Agent Blogcast, empowering agents to elevate their business to the next level.
Challenges are just a guide, leading you, don't run and hide. You've got the heart, you've got the drive, feel it pound, you're alive, Power Agent.
So, imagine you are getting ready to sell your home.
Okay.
You've, painted the trim, you've hidden all the clutter in the closet.
As you do.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And your real estate agent sits down at your kitchen table with a proposal.
Uh-huh.
They lean in and suggest this, like exclusive private listing. They tell you they want to build up hype before the house goes public, tap into their brokerage's private VIP network.
It sounds incredibly luxurious.
It really does. It sounds like you're getting the velvet rope treatment. But what if I told you that the feeling of being in that exclusive club could silently cost you $15,000?
I mean, that is a staggering hidden cost.
Yeah.
And the mechanics of how that happens, they're playing out right under the surface of the housing market every single day.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are unpacking this really passionate, urgently written manifesto dated March 18th, 2026.
Right.
And the author is a 35-year real estate veteran, like an industry coach.
Someone who really knows the inside of the machine.
Exactly. And their warning is incredibly clear. They say there's this massive, invisible war happening right now in the American real estate industry.
Yeah, a fundamental shift in how homes are listed.
Right. And the author argues it could literally break the foundation of the American housing market.
Well, and we are already seeing the fault lines. I mean, this isn't some abstract future threat.
Right.
It is an active restructuring of how properties are bought and sold in major cities right now.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the catalysts for this manifesto are two recent major announcements that honestly sound like a massive win for consumers on the surface.
They really do.
First, Zillow announced this preview program, partnering with giant brokerages like Keller Williams and RE/MAX.
Right.
And then almost immediately after, EXP Realty announced a partnership with Homes.com.
Yeah, that was a big one.
So the consumer-facing pitch here is that these programs give buyers an organized, streamlined way to see, coming soon homes before they hit the broader market.
Right, but the author of our source material views these new programs as a classic Trojan horse.
Ooh, okay. How so?
Well, the real estate industry generally is, breathing a sigh of relief because these portal partnerships are more compliant and visible than the old shadow market of purely hidden whisper networks.
Right, the off-the-book stuff.
Exactly. But they are actually accelerating a much more dangerous systemic problem, which is the death of the MLS, the multiple listing service.
Because it's like training the public to treat the MLS as an afterthought.
Precisely.
If you condition sellers and agents to believe that the primary action, like the initial hype, the premium buyers, if you think all that happens off-market,
then the MLS becomes merely the second stop.
right, it becomes a fallback instead of the foundation.
And if the MLS loses its status as the definitive primary marketplace, it slowly loses its power to enforce transparency.
Wow.
And to understand why bypassing the MLS is so dangerous, we have to look at why it matters so much in the first place.
Right, which we kind of take for granted, I think.
Oh, absolutely. The American MLS system is a massive anomaly globally. The author mentions traveling internationally to places like Germany, Greece, or Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And when they explain how the U.S. system works, foreign agents are genuinely stunned.
See, that's wild to me. So if I want to buy a house in a deeply fragmented market, like Germany, for example, what does that actually look like for me as a consumer?
Well, you are navigating an entirely opaque marketplace where the power rests totally with whoever happens to hold the listing.
Oh, I see.
You might have to visit like 10 different real estate agencies, look in their specific office windows, or check their individual websites just to see what's for sale.
That sounds exhausting. So there's no centralized database at all?
No, the inventory is completely siloed.
The U.S. system, by contrast, is arguably the greatest infrastructure for real estate transparency ever built.
It really is.
Because any buyer can see virtually every home on the market, and any agent can compete on a totally level playing field. It's kind of like a grand public library. Everyone in town has the exact same library card.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, you walk in, and every single book in the entire city is available to you.
Right.
But what this new private listing trend is doing is taking that grand library and carving it up into exclusive, VIP-only book clubs.
Yeah.
And if you aren't in the right club, you don't even know the book exists.
That's a great way to put it. And I should note, the author is careful to clarify that this isn't an attack on the concept of privacy itself.
Oh, sure.
If a seller genuinely wants to keep their sale quiet, maybe they are going through a difficult divorce, or they're a public figure who just doesn't want strangers walking through their bedroom.
Right. Totally understandable.
Yeah, they absolutely have the right to keep their listing off the open market.
Right. And we're just reporting what the source says here.
Yeah.
And the issue isn't the rare, truly private seller.
No, not at all.
The issue is how these private programs are being weaponized as a default standard operating strategy by massive corporate brokerages.
Which brings us to a really shocking statistical paradox in the source.
Lay it on me.
If the MLS is this ultimate level playing field that maximizes visibility and benefits the consumer, why are massive brokerages suddenly trying to build walled gardens?
Well, the numbers in the manifesto are wild.
They are.
Just 3 years ago, private or coming soon listings made up only about 2% of major U.S. markets.
Just 2%.
Right. And today, it's sitting between 5 and 10%. In San Francisco, it's 17%.
Wow.
Yeah. In the Mid-Atlantic, it's 8%. And the trajectory shows it hitting 15 to 20% very soon.
That is a massive shift.
It is. And this shift isn't an accident. It's being driven by just 6 major brokerages who control 40 to 45% of listings in key metropolitan areas.
Yeah, and places like Northern California and D.C., those 6 companies control 60 to 80% of the inventory.
That is huge.
It is. When a few corporations control up to 80% of the inventory and actively choose to withhold a significant portion of it from the shared public database, I mean, it represents a tectonic shift in market economics.
Okay, but let me genuinely push back on this for a second.
Go for it.
If I am a seller and I list my house privately with one of these massive brokerages, a company that has, tens of thousands of agents in my region.
Right.
Doesn't keeping it in-house still give me a massive pool of buyers? I mean, are we just talking about ultra-luxury $10 million mansions where the buyer pool is tiny anyway? Why is this actually bad for the average seller?
Well, what's fascinating here is the data the author provides from the biggest brokerage in the United States. And this applies across all price points, not just luxury.
Okay.
According to the source, 55% of this brokerage's new listings start as private or coming soon.
55%. That's more than half.
Yes. But 94% of those private listings eventually fail to sell internally and end up on the public MLS anyway.
Wait, really? So out of all those homes kept in the private network, only 6% actually sell in-house.
Only 6%.
That's terrible.
Right. If the success rate of the private network is that abysmal, why are 55% of sellers choosing to start there?
Because they're being told to.
Exactly. The author strongly suggests sellers aren't actively demanding this. They're being guided into it by agents who are leveraging the promise of exclusivity without explaining the mathematical costs.
Man, and if sellers are being guided into a strategy with a 94% failure rate, the math on the back end is just brutal.
It is.
And this is where that $15,000 invisible cost comes in. The source cites research showing that off-MLS homes, the ones sold privately, sell for 1.5 to 3.7% less than comparable homes on the open market.
Which is a huge hit.
It is. On a $500,000 home, you are losing between $7,500 and $18,500 in equity.
And the mechanism behind that loss is just foundational economics. The MLS creates maximum visibility. Maximum visibility creates maximum competition.
And competition is what drives multiple offers.
Exactly. And multiple offers are the only thing that drives prices above baseline market value.
Makes total sense.
When you artificially limit the buyer pool to just one brokerage's internal network, regardless of how large that brokerage is, you mathematically reduce competition.
Because fewer buyers will never lead to a higher price.
Never. The source notes this trend of going private has already cost sellers over $1 billion in lost equity in a single year.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
But, sellers aren't just volunteering to lose money.
No, of course not.
If the math is that bad, agents must be leveraging some sort of psychological fear to push them into these private networks in the first place.
They absolutely are.
And that brings us to the psychological warfare of real estate portals. Specifically, a concept the author calls the doom clock.
Ah, the doom clock. It is the engine driving this entire private listing movement.
Tell me about it.
So when a listing hits the public MLS, it immediately syndicates, meaning the data is automatically broadcasted out to consumer portals like Zillow or Realtor.com.
Right.
Those sites prominently display a counter showing exactly how many days the home has been on the market. And they flag every single price reduction in bright red text.
Oh, yeah. Any buyer who has spent time on these apps knows exactly what that looks like.
It's unavoidable.
And it totally changes a buyer's mindset. The text compares it perfectly. It says, buyers stop acting like people looking for a dream home to raise their family in, and they start acting like hostage negotiators looking for a desperate deal.
That is so accurate.
Right. If a house has been sitting for 112 days with two $10,000 price drops, there's blood in the water.
Exactly. And agents use this very real fear of the doom clock to convince sellers to list privately.
Ah, so that's the pitch.
Yeah. The pitch is highly persuasive. They say, let's test the market in our private network first. We'll put a premium price on it. If it doesn't sell, no one outside our network knows, and the public doom clock hasn't started ticking.
I mean, I have to admit, it sounds like a smart, risk-free strategy to the seller.
It does, but the author calls this a complete smokescreen.
A smokescreen. Why?
Because the underlying motivation often comes down to commission structure.
Oh, follow the money.
Always. If an agent sells a house on the open MLS, they typically split the total commission, say 6%, with the agent who brings the buyer.
So the listing agent gets 3%, the buyer's agent gets 3%.
Right. But if the listing agent keeps the property in-house and finds the buyer within their own brokerage, they can often represent both sides.
Ah, so they double dip.
Yes.
They act as a dual agent and pocket the entire 6% commission themselves.
Exactly.
That is a massive financial incentive for the agent to limit the buyer pool, even if it mathematically lowers the final sale price for the seller.
It is a huge conflict of interest. And furthermore, fixing the psychological anxiety of the doom clock doesn't actually require destroying the MLS.
No.
No, the fix is remarkably simple.
Just force the portals to hide the days on market data?
Precisely. If that specific data point serves no positive structural purpose and only introduces bad incentives that drive sellers off the open market, the portal should just remove it.
Yeah, you don't need to fundamentally alter the transparency of the entire housing market just to hide a counter on a website.
Exactly.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. To illustrate exactly what a post-MLS world looks like, the author shares a personal anecdote and points straight to commercial real estate.
This part is fascinating.
It is. They were looking for a commercial property on Long Island, a massive, highly valuable piece of real estate listed by a top agent at Douglas Elliman.
Okay.
They checked the commercial MLS, nothing. They checked Zillow, nothing. They ran Google searches, nothing.
The property essentially did not exist in any searchable public database anywhere on the internet.
Right. The only way you could find this property was if you happened to physically drive past the yard sign, or if you, knew a guy in the right affluent network.
That is why.
It's an entirely opaque, relationship-dependent club. And the author's point is chilling. It says if we let the residential MLS die by 1,000 cuts of private listings, this is exactly where the housing market is heading.
And the implications of that shift go far beyond just convenience or a seller trying to get top dollar.
Oh, absolutely.
The author, who admits they usually roll their eyes when fair housing is brought up in abstract policy debates, says the fair housing angle here is a mechanical reality we cannot ignore.
Because if a listing is marketed exclusively through one brokerage's private network, the pool of buyers is mathematically limited to the demographics of whoever that specific brokerage typically serves.
Precisely. We are looking strictly at the mechanics outlined in the source, but the reality is this. If a brokerage primarily operates in affluent, highly connected zip codes, and they shift to keeping their listings private within their own network, buyers from other backgrounds, different income levels, or different neighborhoods will literally never know those houses are for sale.
Wow. It creates an invisible structural barrier to entry.
It does. Transparency is the great equalizer. Removing it naturally segregates the market.
So if we know the disease like a $1 billion loss of equity and a fractured, opaque market, how do we cure it without stripping sellers of their right to privacy?
Well, the manifesto doesn't just complain. It outlines a logical progression of solutions, moving from behavioral fixes to systemic infrastructure changes.
Let's get into those.
The behavioral fixes start with what we just discussed, removing the days on market and price history from public portals to eliminate the seller's fear of the doom clock.
Right, an easy win.
But the author pairs that with a consumer empowerment tool.
The lead paint style disclosure. I loved this part. It is such a smart, practical idea.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Just like a real estate agent is legally required to have you sign a disclosure about lead paint in an older home, the author proposes a mandatory financial disclosure for private listings.
Right.
The agent must present a form that shows the seller exactly how much money they might lose by going private. It puts that 1.5 to 3.7% equity loss statistic right in front of them in black and white.
And forces the seller to sign that they understand the financial risk of limiting their buyer pool.
Exactly. It completely neutralizes the agent's smokescreen.
It does. Now, if the behavioral fixes address the psychology, the systemic fixes address the infrastructure.
Okay, what's first?
The author proposes a mechanism called the private toggle on the MLS.
How does that work?
Under this rule, every single listing must go into the centralized MLS database, but the seller can choose to flip a toggle marking it private.
So it's still in the system.
Yes. All the other agents in the market can see the address, the price, and the property details, but no one can physically show the house without the listing agent's explicit permission.
I love the way this works in practice. It's kind of like walking down the street and seeing a rare vintage watch in a shop window.
Right.
There is thick glass, you can't touch it, you can't try it on. But because you can physically see it exists in the window, you can walk into the shop and make the owner an incredible offer.
That's a great analogy.
With the private toggle, a buyer's agent can see the hidden house in the system, call the listing agent and say, look, I have a fully qualified cash buyer willing to pay above asking.
And this is where the legal mechanics of the real estate industry kick in.
Oh, right. Fiduciary duty.
Exactly. Once that listing agent receives a legitimate, highly qualified offer, they have a fiduciary duty to present it to their seller. They are legally obligated to act in the seller's best financial interest.
So they cannot block the sale just to keep the listing in-house and double dip on the commission.
Nope. The private toggle forces market transparency while still respecting the seller's physical privacy.
That is brilliant. The manifesto also takes aim at the financial incentives of the portals themselves. Let's talk about lead routing.
Oh, this is a big one. This gets to the heart of how massive portals monetize their platforms.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Right now, on sites like Zillow, if a buyer clicks Contact Agent on a listing, that lead doesn't usually go to the agent who actually listed the house.
Wait, really? Who does it go to?
The portal routes the lead to whichever buyer's agent paid them the most money for ad space in that specific zip code.
Oh, wow. Which creates massive friction.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are a listing agent at a giant brokerage, why would you put your premium listing on Zillow, only to watch Zillow sell the buyer lead to a competitor?
Exactly. It creates a huge financial incentive to hide the listing in your own private network, capturing both the buyer and the seller in-house.
That is so broken.
Well, the source points out that platforms like Homes.com do it differently. They route the lead directly to the listing agent.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the author argues that if all portals adopted this "you're listing your lead" model, the financial incentive for brokerages to hide listings would evaporate overnight.
Because brokerages could list publicly, knowing they won't lose control of the buyer relationship or the potential commission.
Precisely.
Okay, so those are the structural fixes.
Right.
But what happens if the major brokerages and tech portals refuse to adopt them? Because the author outlines some massive macro-level interventions, too.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the manifesto proposes a Residential Listing Transparency Act.
The author treats home listings almost like SEC filings for public companies.
It is a very apt analogy. I mean, a public company can operate confidentially day to day, but they legally have to file their quarterly financials with the Securities and Exchange Commission to ensure market fairness.
Right.
Under this proposed act, you could market your property completely privately if you choose, but you would be legally required to register its existence in a public database within 7 days.
So you keep total control of who comes into your house, but the overarching market retains its data transparency.
Exactly.
Which leads us to the final, absolute nuclear option.
A big one.
Yeah. If these 6 massive brokerages won't stop building walled gardens, the author says we might have to turn the MLS into a public utility.
Like the electrical grid or the municipal water supply.
Right. Because listing data isn't just a proprietary business asset. It is vital civic infrastructure.
And the friction here would be immense. I mean, portals and giant brokerages rely on proprietary data to justify their billions in valuation.
Now, they would fight it tooth and nail.
Absolutely. But the author's argument is that when major corporations unilaterally decide to withhold up to 55% of the housing inventory from the shared market, the voluntary cooperative model of the MLS is already dead.
Wow.
A public utility framework would legally strip control from private corporations and ensure that listing data remains a public resource rather than a competitive weapon.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Whether you are trying to buy your first condo, getting ready to sell your family home, or if you're just fascinated by how market economics actually work beneath the surface, this invisible war affects your wallet.
It really does.
If you are interviewing real estate agents anytime soon, you now have the insider knowledge. You know to ask them for the data on their private listings.
Yes.
You know to demand full, open market exposure for your property, because radical transparency, maximum visibility, and level competition, that is what built the American housing market into the economic powerhouse it is today.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final ripple effect to ponder, something the source hints at with its mention of civic infrastructure.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we've spent this entire deep dive talking about the buyers, the sellers, and the agents. But what about the neighbors?
Oh, that is a crucial missing piece of the puzzle.
Think about the mechanics of your local town's economy. If 20 or 30% of all home sales eventually happen completely off the grid, buried inside these private brokerage networks, how will independent appraisers know what the houses in your neighborhood are actually worth?
Oh, wow.
How will local tax assessors accurately evaluate property values to fund your schools and roads if a third of the transactions are hidden in a corporate black box?
That is terrifying.
Are we quietly moving toward a future where the true value of your biggest financial asset is simply a secret held by a handful of corporations?
It all comes back to that kitchen table, doesn't it? That seductive feeling of being invited into an exclusive, luxurious club.
It really does.
But as we have explored today, the price of admission to that club might just be the entire foundation of the housing market and $15,000 of your own hard-earned equity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of real estate. Stay curious, keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll catch you next time.